Okay, so, hi guys. First, I want to say thank you for helping me with this project and participating in my presentation. Today we're going to talk about listening. I know you're probably already thinking that you know how to listen, and that is probably true, but do you know how to listen effectively? Over the last 8 weeks, I've been taking a course called Understanding Human Communications. It has really opened my eyes to how we communicate and reasons why we may not communicate effectively. The one thing that stood out in my mind is how much listening can affect our ability to effectively communicate with others. It can be very difficult to listen to someone who is talking over our head or talking about something we are not particularly interested in. And as we know, having a difficult or heated conversation with others can be complicated. What complicates these conversations even worse is that when we don't actually listen. There's a difference between listening and listening to listen. Does that make sense? No, probably not. What I mean by that is we're often listening to form our responses or to form our responses or listening to hear what we think the other person is saying. Sometimes when we are conversing with someone we have had a disagreement with in the past, we might even be listening defensively or listening to find something we can ambush them with later. We may mistake the meaning of something that they say to us as a personal attack or an argumentative statement, and instead of questioning whether or not that's what they meant, we just assume that our initial interpretation is correct. It is easy to get into this kind of habit of listening. What I've learned in my class about listening is that we should listen with an open mind. Do not approach conversations with any preconceived notions. Listen to the words they're really saying, and if there is any question in your mind of their meaning, then ask. Look at their body language to see what type of feeling or attitude it is conveying. Having a bad attitude of our own or being angry right off the bat can lead to an unnecessary tension between us and the other person or people involved. With all of this being said, I'm sure you're wondering, am I an effective listener? How can I be a better listener? Our textbook outlines several ways in which you can become a better listener, and I would like to share those with you today. Did you know that listening and hearing are actually two different things? Hearing is actually a physiological activity that occurs when sound waves hit functioning eardrums. Hearing is not the only way we receive messages. Listening is more complex than hearing. The International Listening Association defines listening as the process of receiving, constructing meaning from, and responding to spoken and or nonverbal messages. It can be difficult to really listen to people, especially if it is a heated conversation or they are talking about something you may not be particularly interested in. During a heated conversation, it is important to listen closely to what the other person is saying. You really have to hear what they are telling you, not what you think you want to hear. In conversations that do not really interest you, it is just as important to listen. What they are saying may not mean much to you, but it's obviously important to them or they would not be telling you. The first step in the listening process is to be mindful. Mindfulness is focusing on what is happening in the moment. If you're thinking of funny stuff, you're probably not listening. Or if you're like me, you're thinking about what you want to eat. It can be very distracting. The second step is to physically receive communication. You might hear the words that people are saying, but it's also important to read the nonverbal behaviors. What do the person's facial expressions tell you about what they are saying and how they feel about it? What does their body language say about it as well? Are they happy? Are they angry? Are they sad? Imagine if you could not hear the words they were saying, but by watching their facial expressions and body language, you could still interpret how they feel. In order to receive communication effectively, it is important to remove other distractions around you, such as others talking and the television. You should also face the person speaking to help you remain attentive. Have you ever heard of selective hearing? Well, if used correctly, selective hearing can actually be an important tool for listening effectively. We naturally pick and choose what to listen to and retain, and we organize it by importance. This is the third step in the listening process. It is important that we attempt to listen and organize, not by what we think is important to us, but by what we think is important to the speaker. We should not try to take what they are telling us and make it fit into our feelings and ideas. On the contrary, we should be opening our minds to the point they are trying to make, and even if their ideas may not agree with our own. Mindfulness is important in this step of the listening process as well. If we are not being attentive to the speaker, we may miss body language and facial expressions that would tell us what the speaker feels passionate about and what is most important to them. Knowing how the speaker feels will in turn help us as listeners to know how to respond to them. The fourth step in the listening process is interpreting communication. When we interpret, we are using the spoken words, facial expressions, body language, and etc. to decipher the message from the speaker. We are piecing together what they want us to know using the information we are being given. Effective interpretation depends on your ability to understand the other's terms. This means you have to listen to their meaning of what they are telling you, not your own. Even if you don't agree with them, you can still recognize their viewpoint as viable. It is your ethical responsibility as a listener to attempt to understand the speaker's point of view. This does not mean that you slap your own meaning on their words. This means that you truly try to understand their meaning. The fifth step in the listening process is responding. When you respond to someone, you are expressing interest in many different ways, which include asking questions, voicing your own ideas on the topic, and listening attentively, communicating attentiveness. Responding coincides with many other ways that we can express our attentiveness to the speaker. Indicators of engagement include attentive posture, head nods, eye contact, and vocal responses such as mm-hmm and go on. The sixth and final step in the listening process is remembering. 8 hours after receiving a message, we recall only about 35% of our interpretations of the message. We are all very busy people. A lot can happen in an 8-hour period to cause us to forget things. That is why it is essential that we try to remember the most important parts of the message. And it is usually not feasible to be able to remember a speech or presentation word for word, but you can typically remember the highlights if you're listening attentively. We all run into many different obstacles that keep us from being effective listener. There are two broad types of obstacles to listening well. Situational obstacles that are in communication context and internal obstacles that are within communicators. Ooh, I don't know how to go back. Incomprehensibility is when a message is not clearly understandable due to language or transmission problems. One of our 4 situational obstacles to listening is incomprehensibility. Message overload is the receiving of more messages than we can interpret, evaluate, and remember. It can interfere with effective listening. That's the best I could do. Message complexity. The amount of detailed information or intricate reasoning is in a message. It can interfere with effective listening. Environmental distractions in communication situations, any occurrence that interferes with listening. Other people talking, blah, blah, blah. The television on in the background, or even music playing. Internal obstacles include preoccupation or absorption in your own thoughts or concerns. Prejudgment, judging others or their ideas before one has heard them. Or just a lack of effort. Reacting to emotionally loaded language. Words that evoke very strong positive or negative responses. It is important that we know what words or phrases bring about a strong emotional reaction for us and then learn how to deal with them when they come up. Knowing what triggers a strong reaction in us can help us cope better when the situation arises. Not recognizing diverse listening styles. A final hindrance to effective listening is not recognizing and adjusting to different listening styles that reflect diverse cultures and social communities. Forms of ineffective listening. Pseudo-listening, when you pretend to listen but you're really not. Monopolizing is when you take over, or other people take over the conversation. Sometimes I feel like I'm guilty of doing this because a lot of times whenever someone's talking to me and maybe telling me a personal story, I'll like try to relate. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, Jamie's one of those people that everything that happened to everybody else has also happened to her. Selective listening is when we focus only on the things that interest us or the things that coincide with our beliefs and opinions. When we selectively listen, we are listening to everything the speaker is saying. We could miss key points in the conversation by only paying attention to what interests us. Defensive listening. When we listen defensively, we're perceiving everything that someone says as a personal attack. When we feel like any remark made is directed at us in an aggressive manner, and if we enter into a conversation assuming that the other person does not like us, we may assume everything they say is meant in a disrespectful or derogatory manner. Ambushing. Ambushing is when we only listen to someone to gather ammunition to be used against them in the future. We might twist their words and give them meaning that is not intended. Literal listening is when we listen to the literal meaning of the words, when we're kind of ignoring body language and posture and only listening to what the literal meaning is. For example, every husband knows that when his wife says, "do whatever you want," or "okay, I'm fine," she really means that you should probably look a little bit deeper into what she's saying. What does his wife's body language tell him, and her facial expressions? You can read a lot about how she really feels if you just look at her face. These are all forms of ineffective listening. Now let me share with you a few ways that you can be a more effective listener. Informational and critical. We can use informational and critical listening to gather information and ideas and then analyze them to decide if this is something or someone that we agree with. If the person we are talking or listening to seems sketchy and the information they give out is incorrect, this would probably not be someone we could trust or gather factual information from. Relationship. Listening to gather information and listening to someone you have a personal relationship with requires two different kinds of listening skills to be effective. The one thing they both have in common, however, is mindfulness. This seems to be a common thread with listening altogether. It's hard to truly listen, remember, and comprehend if we are not mindful of what is being said. Most of the time when we are listening to someone we have a relationship with, we are there for support, which means we should make them feel supported by suspending judgment, by becoming judgmental of those who look to us for support. We will push them away and cause them to be unwilling to share intimate thoughts and feelings with us in the future. When we pass judgment on them, we are no longer that person they can come to feel safe. Striving to understand the other person's perspective is an extremely important part of relationship listening. We must be more people-centered and work hard to Work hard to do this outside of our own thoughts, feelings, and opinions so that we can fully grasp the other person's thoughts, feelings, and opinions. We should encourage others to share their ideas with us, and we can do this by keeping an open mind and not monopolizing the conversation. Minimal encouragers may keep us from monopolizing a conversation and invite others to elaborate. Examples of minimal encouragers include tell me more, really, go on, etc. We can also show that we are supporting and paying attention to them by paraphrasing what they say to us. A friend says, with all the changes taking place at work, I often wonder about the stability of my job. In turn, you could say, it sounds like you are concerned about losing your job. Paraphrasing lets your spouse or friend know that both of you are on the same page and that you get what they are saying. It is also a good idea to ask questions just to make sure that you understand exactly what is being said. We should also express support. This does not mean you agree with them, it just means you support their decision and have faith in their decision-making abilities. You could say something like, I understand why you would make that decision. I might not do the same, but I have faith in your ability to make your own decisions. Did you realize there were so many pieces to the listening puzzle? Now that you have heard about the listening process, I hope that you can understand how the whole process can fail if just one piece is missing. Now you know the difference between listening and hearing. You have also been given some tools to be effective listeners, and you have been informed of some obstacles that might get in the way of your ability to truly listen. Do you have any questions for me?
No.
Okay.